The war in Gaza has resulted in a lot of casualties: civilians, aid workers, and even Israeli soldiers. Now, every single one of them have become a target in this war. Now, in the latest, the United Nations staff member was tragically killed in the Gaza Strip in an Israeli assault. The incident occurred in Rafah when the United Nations vehicle was targeted, marking the first international casualty amongst the United Nations staff since the Israeli offensive began on the 7th of October. And also in a pretty dramatic shift, the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has revised its data pertaining to the number of Palestinians who've been killed in this 7-month-long offensive. Now, they've reduced the death toll by almost half of the number of women and children that they had previously said had been killed. Now, the United Nations says that the death toll in the Gaza Strip from the war is still more than 35,000. But the Enclave's Ministry of Health has updated its breakdown of fatalities. It has further added that this figure actually represents the number of identified casualties. That is to say that there are still many bodies that are unidentified, and there are also many bodies that still remain underneath the rubble. And the documentation process of fully identifying the remaining casualties of the Palestinians who have been killed in this Israeli onslaught is still ongoing.
Number remains unchanged, and it's at more than 35,000 people since October 7th. What's changed is the Ministry of Health in Gaza has updated the breakdown of fatalities for whom full details have been documented. So what they recently published was that they gave figures for 24,686 out of 34,622 overall fatalities recorded in Gaza.
On the other hand, the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has said that more than 1,000 members of Hamas are being treated in hospitals in Turkey, reiterating his stance that Hamas is actually a resistance movement for Palestinian liberation.
Ben asla Hamas'ı bir terör örgütü olarak görmüyorum.
I never see Hamas as a terrorist organization, and as of this moment, I follow Hamas step by step. And in my country right now, more than 1,000 Hamas members are in our hospitals, all of them undergoing treatment.
Hamas'ın mensupları hastanelerimizde.
Meanwhile, on the battlefield, the Israeli forces have pushed deep into northern Gaza again. This is an area that the Israelis had earlier claimed that they had managed to flush out the Hamas fighters from. But now, the Israelis are back bombing places like Jabalia. In the south, the Israeli tanks and troops have pushed across a highway into Rafah, and this has left the Palestinian civilians scrambling for safety all over again. Now, according to a top official within the Biden administration, the Americans now, after 7 long months of relentless bombing of the Gaza Strip, they say that they do not see that it is possible for the state of Israel to achieve total victory in defeating Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Listen to what's been said.
In some respects, we are struggling over what the theory of victory is. And I think sometimes when we listen closely to Israeli leaders, they talk about mostly the idea of some sort of sweeping victory on the battlefield, total victory. I don't think we believe that that is likely or possible.
Now, elsewhere in the West Bank, the Israeli protesters blocked aid, humanitarian aid that was headed for Gaza. The protesters were seen vandalizing and throwing off supplies from the trucks. These are supplies that could have been used by the starving Palestinians, where famine, of course, looms. But this is what the Israelis were up to, destroying the aid that was meant for the Palestinians. All right, now WION's correspondent from the State of Israel, Jody Cohen, has been tracking the developments pretty closely from Ra'anana within Israel. Now, she tells us about the Israeli response after the American Deputy Secretary of State, Kurt Campbell, pretty categorically said that the Americans now do not see it as possible for the State of Israel to achieve a total victory in this war over Hamas. Listen to what Jody Cohen had to say.
So Campbell compared Israel's situation to the situations that the US was in after 9/11, where after civilian populations had been moved and there was lots of violence, he said insurrections continued and there needs to be a political solution. Now today is Israel's 76th Independence Day and the first since the 7th of October. In an interview, Prime Minister Netanyahu suggested that Israel can defeat Hamas, he said, by destroying their organised battalions and mopping up their remaining places. Now, many commentators are also suggesting that there's a key difference between this conflict and the US in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that's the distance between the entities involved. The US was fighting across continents, but it's just a 5-minute drive between Hamas and the Israeli communities on the Gaza border. Now, in terms of a political solution, Netanyahu suggested that no Palestinian would come forward to run Gaza if they think they'll get a bullet in the head from Hamas, so that Hamas needs to be defeated, and he suggested that Hamas would be defeated.
And Jody also gives us some details about the Israeli perspective on the number of Palestinian civilians who've been killed in this 7-month-long onslaught that has gone on in the Gaza Strip. But remember, the Hamas-run health ministry has said that 35,000 Palestinians have been killed in the war. And the United Nations has now given out a statement saying that it is looking at the number of casualties, which still remains at 35,000 plus, but it has revised the division in terms of how the number and the categories of those who've been killed has been categorized. Listening to what Jody Cohen had to say.
So the UN statement cutting the number of women and child casualties by nearly half is consistent with what Israel has been saying for months, that Hamas's civilian casualty figures were inaccurate and inflated. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu announced that 14,000 Hamas combatants and approximately 16,000 civilians have been killed in the fighting in Gaza. Israel says a further 1,000 Hamas gunmen were killed on the 7th of October. Now, Prime Minister spokesperson Avi Hyman said that every innocent civilian killed is a tragedy, and for the first time they announced the combatant to civilian casualty ratio as being roughly 1-to-1. Now, for perspective, the US achieved a ratio of 1-to-3 in Afghanistan. The UN says the average ratio in war is 1-to-9, and US military expert John Spencer has said that Israel has set a gold standard and taken more effort to protect civilians on the other side than any army in military history.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.